The clock started running 2 days ago, and it's already breaking. Right now, as you're watching this, J.D. Vance is on a plane to Islamabad, Pakistan, to sit across a table from Iranian negotiators. The talks were brokered by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who invited both delegations to negotiate what he called a conclusive agreement to settle all disputes. The whole world is watching. Markets are moving. Gas stations are updating their signs. But here's what nobody's telling you. Before the talks even started, Iran's parliament speaker stood up and said 3 of the deal's clauses had already been violated, not after negotiations collapsed, not after a side walked out, before anyone sat down, before a single agreement was signed. 3 violations on day 1. And if you think that's just political posturing, just noise from the other side of the world that has nothing to do with your life, I need you to stay with me for the next 10 minutes. Because this story isn't really about Iran. It's not about Vance or Trump or Khamenei's successor. It's about a number. A very specific number that controls what you pay at the gas pump, what you pay at the grocery store, what your portfolio does this week, and what inflation does to every dollar you've saved. That number is 20%. Roughly 20% of all the oil in the world passes through a strip of water 21 miles wide. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and Oman, and its 2 narrow shipping lanes carry around 20 million barrels of oil every single day. 20 million barrels, every day, through a corridor you could drive across in less than half an hour. Now imagine someone closes that corridor. Actually, you don't have to imagine it, it already happened. On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran in what was called Operation Epic Fury. Iran's supreme leader was killed on the first day. Within days, Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced the strait was closed. By March 2nd, no tankers were broadcasting signals. The water went silent. And here's what that silence cost you. Gas prices in the U.S., which were sitting just under $3 a gallon when the strikes began, had climbed to an average of $4.16 by the time the ceasefire was announced. That's $1.18 more per gallon. If you have a 15-gallon tank and fill up twice a week, that's around $35 extra every single week coming out of your pocket. Not because you changed your habits, not because you drove more, because of a waterway in the Persian Gulf. But the gas pump is just where you feel it first. Think about what actually moves through that water. It's not just oil. Up to 30% of globally traded fertilizers transit the Strait of Hormuz. Fertilizer feeds crops, crops become food, food fills grocery stores. So when that water gets blocked, you don't just pay more to drive to work. You pay more for everything that arrived on a truck, was grown in a field, or was manufactured with energy. Eggs, bread, chicken, cereal. The entire supply chain tightens like a fist. The OECD predicted that U.S. inflation would hit 4.2% in 2026, well above the 2.68% average of the year before. That might sound like a small number, but inflation is not a small thing when it compounds, when it grinds into everything, when it quietly erases the purchasing power of money you thought was safe sitting in a savings account earning 3%. And here's the twist nobody was talking about enough. The International Energy Agency called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, not the largest in recent years, not the largest since the Gulf War, the largest ever recorded. And that's a specific kind of milestone, because it means the playbook for what comes next is thinner than people want to admit. We have never been here before. So when the ceasefire was announced 2 days ago, markets exhaled. The reaction was almost immediate. The Dow jumped over 1,300 points. The Nasdaq climbed 2.54%. The S&P 500 rose over 2%. Oil, which had been trading as high as $117 a barrel the day before, plunged toward $95. Relief, optimism, the kind of single-day rally that makes headlines and makes people feel like the worst is over. But here's where it gets complicated. Even with oil down sharply, WTI crude was still sitting at roughly $96 a barrel, more than 40% above where it was before the war started. The rally didn't erase the damage, it just paused it. And more importantly, the thing the rally was betting on, a real, lasting deal, hasn't happened yet. What has happened is a 2-week window, a fragile pause, and inside that pause, 2 sides are sitting down who disagree on almost everything. Iran's 10-point proposal includes continued control over the Strait of Hormuz, a complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region, and critically, the right to continue enriching uranium. The U.S. position, stated plainly by Trump himself, is that there will be no enrichment, period. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. plan makes clear Iran can never have nuclear weapons, and the White House called Iran's enrichment, right, a red line the president will not back away from. 2 red lines, same table, 2 weeks. And that's before you even get to the Israel problem. While Israel endorsed the ceasefire with Iran on paper, Prime Minister Netanyahu made clear it would not extend to Lebanon. Israel continued heavy strikes there, even as the ceasefire was announced. Iran's parliament speaker said those strikes violated the very first clause of their proposal. Trita Parsi, one of the most respected Iran analysts in Washington, said what everyone in the room was already thinking, that it will be very difficult for Iran to accept a ceasefire for itself, while leaving Lebanon exposed to continued bombing. So Iran is being asked to freeze, Israel is not. Think about what that looks like from Tehran's side of the table. You agreed to pause your military operations, you're reopening the Strait, and while your delegation is flying to Islamabad to negotiate, your ally is being bombed every hour. How long does a government maintain that position without losing the domestic credibility it needs to survive? Iranian authorities had initially vowed to not negotiate at all, only agreeing after sustained pressure from Pakistan and reportedly from China as well. That matters, because it tells you the ceasefire itself was a concession that cost something politically inside Iran. Walking back from a concession is always easier than making one, and the pressure to walk back is building by the hour. Now factor in what history actually says about truces like this. Temporary ceasefires in active conflicts, particularly ones where the underlying demands are this far apart, fail far more often than they succeed. The 2003 Roadmap for Middle East Peace, the Minsk agreements in Ukraine, dozens of attempted truces in the Syrian civil war. In almost every case, both sides used the pause to reposition, rearm, and renegotiate their leverage. The truce becomes a strategic tool, not a path to peace. And if this one fails, if Iran walks out of Islamabad or walks back to war, more than 800 vessels are currently stranded in the region. Operators are waiting for clearer evidence that safe passage can be sustained before resuming normal shipping. The Strait hasn't actually reopened in any meaningful way. Ship transits through the Strait dropped to just 6 per day in March, compared to around 130 before the war. The infrastructure of global energy trade is still frozen. The moment the deal falls apart, that freeze becomes permanent, and every scenario that's been modeled gets dramatically worse. The worry that has stalked markets since late February remains. A prolonged disruption to Gulf oil flows will push a fresh wave of inflation through the global economy, with or without a temporary ceasefire. And here's the thing about inflation that doesn't get explained enough. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. It doesn't land on your doorstep proportionally. It's regressive by nature, meaning it hits harder the less money you have. If you have a portfolio of stocks, some of those companies pass higher costs on to consumers and maintain their margins. You lose some ground, but you absorb it. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, $1.18 more per gallon of gas isn't an annoyance. It's a choice between groceries and medication. Even if you're somewhere in the middle, saving aggressively, building something, inflation quietly erodes the real value of every dollar you're accumulating. Your 401k number might go up, but what that number can actually buy might go down. That gap between nominal and real wealth is where most people's financial plans quietly fall apart, and they never even see it happening. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, understand what the ceasefire actually is. Lloyd's of London, the world's primary hub for maritime and shipping insurance, put it plainly, time will tell whether this is a pause or a peace, and in the meantime, it's highly unlikely that trade in the Gulf will simply resume. None of the underlying tensions have been resolved. Second, watch the Strait more than the talks. The talks are theater. As one energy analyst put it, the Strait is the whole ball of wax, and right now, Washington and Tehran appear to be talking past each other on that point entirely. If tankers start moving in volume, prices will fall. If they don't, prices stay elevated regardless of what anyone says in Islamabad. The water doesn't care about press releases. Third, think about what this means for your portfolio in both directions. Gold jumped 2.5% on the ceasefire news. Silver rose 5%. Energy sector stocks remain elevated. If the deal holds, those positions reverse. If it collapses, they spike further. This isn't a binary moment, it's a probability dial that's moving in real time, and your positioning should reflect that uncertainty, not bet against it. And fourth, and this is the part most people miss, understand that even if this deal works perfectly, analysts say the oil market will never fully return to pre-conflict levels. Because Iran proved it can close the Strait once, and markets will price in that risk permanently going forward. The era of cheap, predictable energy flowing through a narrow Iranian-controlled waterway without a geopolitical premium attached to it is over. That's not a temporary shock. That's a structural change in how global energy is priced. The gas pump you fill up at is not just a gas pump anymore. It's the last visible indicator of a system that runs underneath everything: oil, food, fertilizer, freight, inflation, interest rates, the value of your savings, and that system has just been permanently repriced. 2 weeks, that's all anyone's been given. By the time you see the next headline out of Islamabad, markets will already have moved. The question isn't what happens in those talks. The question is whether you understood what was already happening before the cameras were even turned on. If this broke down something that usually gets buried in news chyrons, share it with someone who's wondering why their grocery bill is still high even though the war is pausing. They deserve to understand the connection too.